The courtroom was already packed by the time the clock struck 9. Not with the usual traffic offenders or small claims petitioners, but with citizens who had read the morning headlines and felt the need to witness the spectacle themselves. A thick, tense silence hovered above the room, the kind that settles before storms, not sentences. Judge Caprio entered slowly, his presence instantly shifting the atmosphere. The room rose in unison, but beneath their respect was a deeper undercurrent, anticipation mixed with dread. Even Caprio felt it, the unspoken weight that something was off today, something darker than the cases he normally presided over. As he took his seat, 2 uniformed officers escorted the defendant forward. Evan Blake, 23, son of Police Chief Raymond Blake, charged with assaulting an elderly veteran in broad daylight. Evan walked with a smirk carved into his face, hands shoved casually into the pockets of his designer jacket. His posture radiated entitlement, chin high, shoulders loose, expression irritatingly relaxed for a man facing serious charges. A few people in the gallery stiffened at the sight of him. One woman whispered, "That's him," and the murmur rippled through the room like a cold wind. Evan seemed to enjoy it, feeding off the attention, eyes wandering left and right in arrogant amusement. Judge Caprio watched him closely before speaking. "Mr. Blake," he began, voice calm but edged with steel, "this courtroom requires respect. Remove your hands from your pockets." Evan raised an eyebrow. "And if I don't?" A sharp intake of breath echoed from the gallery. The audacity was suffocating. Caprio leaned forward slightly, not raising his voice. He never needed to. "You'll discover consequences your father cannot shield you from. Hands." "Oh, no." Evan slowly removed them, but not without rolling his eyes like a spoiled child being scolded. The judge noted every movement, every careless twitch. He had seen arrogance before, but this was something else. A young man who believed he was untouchable simply because of a badge he did not earn. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Mara Holt, stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is a felony assault charge. The victim is a 73-year-old decorated veteran. He suffered." Evan muttered loud enough for the court to hear. Old man should have watched where he was going. Murmurs exploded. Someone gasped. Another person muttered, "Unbelievable." Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Blake, you will remain silent unless spoken to." Evan shrugged. "I'm just saying." Silence. The gavel cracked like lightning through the tension. Evan clenched his jaw, irritation spreading across his face. His confidence faltered for a moment before he masked it again with forced indifference. The courtroom atmosphere thickened. Even breathing felt loud in the suffocating quiet. Prosecutor Holt continued, her tone sharper. "The veteran is not present yet, Your Honor. He's undergoing additional medical evaluations due to yesterday's injuries." The room buzzed again. Where was the victim? How serious was the assault, really? Was this boy about to walk free because of his father's rank? Judge Caprio folded his hands. "We will proceed with testimony from the arresting officers and witnesses. I want complete clarity on what occurred." One of the officers cleared his throat. "Your Honor, when we arrived on scene, Mr. Blake was standing over the victim, shouting. The veteran's head had struck the pavement." "Oh, come on," Evan cut in. "He tripped. Not my fault he's fragile." This time, the entire room turned toward him with disgust. A few people shook their heads. One man whispered, "God help him." Judge Caprio's voice hardened. "Mr. Blake, you are one breath away from contempt of court." Evan smirked, but a flicker of uncertainty passed through his eyes. For the first time, he sensed the judge wasn't playing by the same rules as everyone else who had ever enabled him. Caprio opened his file, scanning the police report, his expression unreadable, until suddenly he froze. His brow furrowed. His eyes lingered on something in the report, something troubling enough to shift his entire expression from stern to deeply alarmed. He looked up. "Officer," he said slowly, "are you telling me this wasn't the first time Mr. Blake had an altercation with this same veteran?" The officer hesitated. The gallery leaned forward. Evan's smirk vanished. Caprio's voice dropped to a chilling calm. "Answer the question." And the room, once merely tense, now held its breath, trembling on the edge of a revelation no one expected. Evan Blake sat at the defendant's table like he owned the courtroom. His fingers drummed lazily against polished wood, each tap echoing with smug indifference. The tension from the previous revelation still lingered. The courtroom had become a sealed container of suspicion, outrage, and disbelief. Judge Caprio studied Evan carefully. The young man's arrogant composure wasn't simply confidence, it was armor. The kind molded by years of privilege, and never being told no. "Mr. Blake," Caprio began, voice steady but sharp, "the officer's hesitation speaks volumes. Before we proceed further, I need truthful clarity." Evan lifted his chin, annoyed. "Why don't you just ask me directly, Your Honor? Might save everyone time." The prosecutor snapped her head toward him. "Mr. Blake, I strongly advise you not to." Evan waved her off with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Relax. I'm not scared of a little courtroom drama." A murmur rippled through the gallery. One man scoffed audibly. Another whispered, "He still thinks this is a joke." Judge Caprio's gaze darkened. "This is not drama. This is a felony charge." Evan smirked. "And yet, here I am. Comfortable. Not in cuffs." His words cut like daggers, not because they were clever, but because they revealed the chilling truth of his worldview. Caprio leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. "Your confidence comes from your father's influence, not your innocence." Evan shrugged. "Call it whatever helps you sleep at night, Judge." Gasps. Whispers. A few spectators stiffened, staring at Evan as if he'd crossed a sacred line. The prosecutor stepped in quickly. "Your Honor, his attitude underscores exactly why this case demands transparency and strict handling." Evan smiled wider, enjoying the chaos he ignited. Caprio's tone shifted, not louder, but colder. "Officer Daniels, approach." The arresting officer walked forward, posture stiff. His eyes avoided Evan completely. Caprio spoke quietly. "Has this defendant had previous confrontations with the victim?" Daniels hesitated again, the same hesitation that ignited everyone's suspicion in Chapter 1. The silence dragged. The courtroom held its breath. Evan's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Finally, Daniels nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. 3 prior incidents in the past 6 months." A collective shockwave pulsed across the room. Evan clenched his teeth. "You weren't supposed to say that." Daniels didn't respond. He simply stepped back, eyes forward. Caprio kept his voice measured. 3 prior incidents, and none were reported? "Internal pressure," the officer admitted quietly. "From higher command." All eyes turned toward Evan. But Evan didn't look ashamed. He looked irritated that the truth had slipped out. He leaned back, arms crossed. "People bump into each other. Things happen." Caprio's stare sharpened. A 73-year-old veteran does not simply bump into the same man 3 times. Evan scoffed. "Maybe he wanted attention." The room erupted, gasps, muttered curses, a woman covering her mouth in disbelief. Caprio struck the gavel hard. "Order!" The prosecutor stepped closer to the bench. "Your Honor, this establishes a pattern of harassment. Possibly targeted." Judge Caprio turned his attention to Evan. "Why did you continue confronting the veteran?" "No reason," Evan replied, voice flat, eyes cold. "That is not an answer." Evan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The smirk returned, darker this time. "Maybe I just don't like people who pretend to be heroes." A chill swept across the room. Judge Caprio's expression froze. His eyes, usually warm even in stern moments, hardened like stone. "Mr. Blake, what exactly did this veteran pretend to be?" Evan shrugged. "Everyone worships veterans. Maybe someone should knock their ego." "Stop." Caprio's voice cracked like thunder. Even Evan blinked, startled. "You will not disrespect a man who served this country," the judge said, each syllable edged with fire. "Not in my courtroom. Not anywhere." For a brief moment, Evan's facade faltered. His smirk faded. His tongue pressed against the inside of his cheek, frustration bubbling underneath. But then he caught himself, straightening, swallowing the flicker of fear. "He's just an old man. Nothing special." A woman in the gallery whispered, trembling, "God, what is wrong with him?" Before Caprio could respond, the courtroom doors suddenly opened. All heads turned. Every expression shifted. The light from the hallway stretched across the polished floor, and a familiar silhouette appeared, walking slowly, leaning on a cane. Judge Caprio's eyes widened. Evan's entire body stiffened. The veteran had arrived early, and the room fell into an unnatural, breathless silence. A silence more dangerous than any words spoken so far. The courtroom's silence deepened as the veteran stepped slowly inside, leaning heavily on his cane. His presence alone shifted the room's temperature, a man bruised, injured, yet somehow dignified beyond the pain etched into his gait. Every spectator rose instinctively, though Judge Caprio had not instructed them to. Respect required no command. Everyone stood. Except Evan. He remained seated, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in irritation at the attention the old man received. Prosecutor Mara Holt watched Evan carefully, jaw ticking. Rage simmered beneath her professional composure, but she waited for the perfect moment to strike. Judge Caprio motioned gently. "Sir, please take a seat. We are grateful you're well enough to be here." The veteran nodded but kept his eyes lowered. Even the act of sitting seemed to hurt him. A deep bruise purpled the side of his temple. The sight tightened the entire room. Evan sighed loudly. "This is getting dramatic." The prosecutor turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Your Honor, permission to address the defendant directly?" Caprio nodded. "Proceed." Holt stepped closer to Evan, every movement sharp with controlled fury. "Mr. Blake, do you see the man you assaulted?" Evan rolled his shoulders. "I see an old guy who falls easily." The gallery erupted in disgusted whispers. Caprio raised his hand for silence. The prosecutor didn't blink. "Let me make something perfectly clear. This man didn't fall. He was shoved. Hard. With enough force that his skull struck concrete, resulting in a concussion, a fractured rib, and severe bruising." She turned to the judge. "And this isn't speculative. We have medical reports, eyewitnesses, and video footage." Evan smirked. "A blurry phone video? Please." Holt stepped closer, leaning down so Evan couldn't look away. "The only blurry thing in this courtroom is your conscience." A gasp rolled across the room. Judge Caprio didn't correct her. Her words, though fiery, reflected the truth. Holt straightened, focusing on the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant's behavior today, mocking the victim, disrespecting the court, minimizing a violent attack, demonstrates not just guilt, but a disturbing absence of remorse." Evan laughed under his breath, but it was forced, strained at the edges. The prosecutor wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice sharper, "this is a pattern. 3 previous confrontations. All suppressed. All involving intimidation or verbal harassment." Judge Caprio's eyebrows lowered. The tension in the room became suffocating. The prosecutor walked slowly toward the veteran. "Sir, can you tell the court what he said to you during those previous encounters?" The veteran hesitated, fingers trembling around the handle of his cane. His voice was quiet, broken around the edges. He called me things. Told me I should have stayed dead overseas." A collective shudder rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Caprio blinked, visibly shaken. Evan scoffed. "Oh, come on. I was joking." "Enough." Caprio thundered, finally losing his composure. "There are no jokes in cruelty." The veteran looked up, eyes glassy but steady. "Yesterday, when he pushed me, he said he was going to teach me a lesson for acting like a hero." Every muscle in the prosecutor's body tightened. The judge's fingers curled into fists on the bench. Even the officers at the door shifted forward protectively. Evan forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. "People are so sensitive." The prosecutor turned deadly calm. "Mr. Blake, you could have killed him." Evan's smirk vanished. Caprio stared at him with a silence heavier than shouting. "You are facing prison, Mr. Blake. Do you understand the gravity?" Evan swallowed hard, the first visible crack in his arrogance. "My father." "Your father is not on this bench," Caprio snapped. and his badge does not give you immunity." The veteran raised a trembling hand. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Caprio softened. "Of course." But before the veteran could utter a word, the courtroom doors slammed open again. Everyone turned. A tall figure entered, face red with fury. It was Police Chief Raymond Blake. His voice thundered through the room. "Judge Caprio, stop this trial immediately." The room froze. Evan's eyes widened with relief. The prosecutor's jaw locked. And Judge Caprio slowly rose from his seat. The air crackled, a confrontation about to explode, more dangerous than anything so far. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop the moment Police Chief Raymond Blake stepped inside. His uniform was immaculate, polished to a shine, but his expression was a storm barely contained. Authority radiated from him like heat, the kind of authority used to bending rules, not obeying them. Every spectator stiffened. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. The veteran's hands trembled slightly on his cane. Evan straightened with sudden confidence, his earlier cracks sealing instantly. With his father present, entitlement surged back into his posture like blood rushing to a wound. Chief Blake pointed a rigid finger toward the bench. "Judge Caprio, this proceeding ends now." The words echoed, heavy and hostile. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. Not even an inch. "This is my courtroom, Chief Blake. You will address me with respect, or you will leave with consequences." A ripple traveled through the gallery, all mixed with fear. Confronting the police chief was no small act. Blake stepped closer, boots striking the floor with militaristic precision. "My son is being treated unfairly. This entire situation has been exaggerated." The prosecutor shot forward. "Unfairly? Chief Blake, your son put a 73-year-old veteran in the hospital." The chief ignored her completely, eyes fixed only on the judge. "I want these charges dismissed." Caprio leaned forward slowly. "And I want justice served." We all face disappointment. Gasps fluttered through the room like startled birds. No one spoke to the chief that way. Blake's jaw tightened. "I'm warning you, Judge. You're threatening me in open court." Caprio's voice cut like a blade, low and dangerous. The chief's lips parted, but he said nothing. Even he realized he'd crossed a line. Prosecutor Holt seized the moment. "Your Honor, the chief's interference should be noted on record." Chief Blake snapped, "Stay out of this, Mara. You wouldn't have your position without my support." The gallery murmured in outrage. Holt's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she held her ground. Caprio's expression darkened like a gathering storm. "Chief Blake, take a seat. Or take the exit. Your presence is becoming obstruction." For a moment, the chief didn't move, a clash of two powers locked in silent warfare. Finally, with a curt, simmering breath, he sat. But the room stayed cold. The prosecutor resumed, voice steady despite the tension. "Your Honor, we have multiple witnesses ready to testify." Caprio nodded. "Call the first." A middle-aged woman stepped forward, nervous but resolute. Her fingers twisted together as she took the stand. "State your name," Holt said. "Karen Ellis." "And what did you witness on the day of the assault?" Karen swallowed hard. I saw Mr. Blake shove the veteran. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him hard." Evan scoffed loudly. "She's lying. I barely touched him." Karen flinched but continued. "He said something too. Right before he shoved him." Judge Caprio leaned in. "What did he say?" Her voice trembled. He told the veteran, "You don't deserve the respect people give you." The courtroom recoiled. Evan slammed his hand on the table. "That's not what I said." Caprio eyed him sharply. "Mr. Blake, you will remain silent. One more outburst and I will have you removed." The chief shifted forward, but Caprio held up a hand, a silent blockade that froze him mid-breath. Karen stepped down, but the tension followed her like a shadow. Next came a young man, early 20s, hands shaking visibly. "He pushed him," the witness whispered. "I saw the veteran hit the pavement. I thought he might be dead." Evan rolled his eyes. "Everyone's so dramatic." The prosecutor glared. "Your Honor, this shows a pattern of—" Suddenly the veteran, silent until now, raised his hand. His voice was faint but firm. "There's something the court should know." All heads turned. Caprio softened. "Take your time, sir." The veteran exhaled shakily. "Before he pushed me, before the other incidents, Evan came up to me once and said something I've never understood." Caprio's brow furrowed. "What did he say?" The veteran looked directly at Evan, eyes full of a deep, old sorrow. "He said, 'You owe my family, and one day I'll collect.'" The courtroom froze. Evan's face drained of color. The chief shot upright in his seat. Judge Caprio slowly rose, shock etched across his face. And the prosecutor whispered only one word. "Why?" The courtroom held its usual morning rhythm, papers shuffling, hushed arguments, and the low buzz of restless defendants, but everything shifted when the bailiff opened the side door. An old man stepped inside. Thin, weather-worn. His coat swallowed him like a heavy memory he couldn't take off. The light overhead revealed deep lines etched across his face, lines carved not by age alone but by survival. Conversation faded. Heads turned. Even Judge Caprio, seasoned by decades of faces and stories, instinctively straightened. The bailiff's voice softened, unusually respectful. "Case 417. Mr. Samuel Holt." Holt stepped forward slowly, leaning on a cane that looked barely more stable than he was. His boots were scuffed, mud dried along the soles, and his eyes, gray and unfocused, searched the floor as though unsure he was welcome in any room anymore. When he reached the defendant's podium, he didn't lift his head right away. Judge Caprio folded his hands, studying him. "Good morning, sir. Can you hear me clearly?" The old man nodded once. "Yes." "Your Honor." There was something in his voice, calm, steady, almost military in its precision despite the frailty around it. A murmur passed through the gallery. Caprio spoke gently. "You're charged with a parking violation, but I want to understand your situation first. Where are you living these days?" Holt hesitated. His throat worked as if swallowing something heavy. "I don't live anywhere permanently, sir." A woman in the back gasped. A man near the aisle shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowering in shame for reasons he couldn't name. Caprio's brows knit, compassion flickering. "Are you receiving any assistance? Family? Friends?" "No," Holt answered, still staring downward. "I manage on my own." "You came here alone?" Caprio asked. Another nod. The judge took a slow breath, choosing his next words. "Mr. Holt, you served in the military." Holt's posture stiffened, just slightly, but enough for anyone who had ever known a soldier to recognize it. "Yes, Your Honor. A long time ago." Caprio leaned forward. "Army." "Marine Corps," Holt corrected softly. A ripple moved across the room. Even the clerk paused typing. "Thank you for your service," Caprio said sincerely. "Do you have any documents or—" Holt raised his eyes for the first time. And the room froze. His stare held not just experience, but something deeper, something guarded. A story too heavy to speak without consequence. "Your Honor," Holt began, fingers gripping the podium. "I don't have papers anymore. They were taken. A long time ago." "Taken?" Caprio repeated, puzzled. Holt nodded once. "When everything changed." The judge's expression sharpened. "Mr. Holt, what do you mean by everything?" The old man's breathing grew uneven. His shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of holding something inside. "I shouldn't talk about it here," he whispered. "Not in public." Now the courtroom wasn't just silent, it was tense, suspended, like everyone was collectively holding a breath. Caprio's tone lowered. "Sir, if there's something affecting your safety or your rights, you can tell me. This court will protect you." Holt looked at him with an expression that sent a chill through even the seasoned officers standing guard. "You can't protect me from this, Judge," he said. "No one can." The gallery shifted uneasily. A young man mouthed, "What is he talking about?" A woman clutched her purse closer. Caprio tried again. "Mr. Holt, You're not in trouble. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to hide it here." Holt closed his eyes. For a moment, it looked like he might collapse under the weight of whatever secret he bore. Then he whispered 4 words that shattered the calm of the room. "They think I'm dead." Gasps erupted. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward. Caprio sat back in shock. "Who thinks you're dead?" the judge demanded. But Holt didn't answer. He simply opened his eyes, filled with something between fear and defiance, and stared at the judge as the room spiraled into stunned silence. And with that haunting stare, the chapter ends. Right as the courtroom realizes nothing about this man, or his past, is what it seems. For several long seconds, no one moved. The echo of Holt's words, "They think I'm dead," hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter, humming with nervous energy. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, hands clasped. His voice was steady, but his eyes showed the pressure of a man balancing compassion with the need for truth. "Mr. Holt," he said calmly, "this court cannot help you unless you explain what you mean. Who thinks you're dead? And why?" Holt didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to his trembling hands, calloused, scarred, and shaking with age or memory, no one could tell. He stood like a man deciding whether honesty was worth the consequences. A woman in the front row whispered, "My God!" A bailiff shot her a warning look, but even he was leaning in slightly, caught in the pull of the moment. Holt swallowed hard. "I disappeared," he said quietly. "Years ago. During my last deployment." Caprio's brow furrowed deeply. "Disappeared? Are you saying you were declared missing?" Holt cut in. "Then presumed dead." Gasps rippled through the gallery again, louder this time. "And you never corrected it?" Caprio asked, voice soft but stunned. Holt shook his head. "I couldn't. I wasn't supposed to be alive." His shoulders curled inward as though bracing against an invisible storm. His body language screamed conflict, fear, guilt, and exhaustion woven into every slow breath. Caprio exchanged a brief look with the clerk, who had paused typing entirely. "Mr. Holt," the judge said, leaning closer, "if you were a missing Marine, this is extremely serious. Did something prevent you from coming home? Were you injured? Captured?" Holt's jaw clenched. His eyes flickered. Anger? Shame? The memory of something unspoken? "I can't tell the whole story," he murmured. "Not yet." Caprio straightened, frustration and sympathy warring for space. "You're in a courtroom, not a battlefield. You're safe here." Holt's hollow laugh had no humor. "Safe? Your Honor, some things follow you longer than war." A chill ran through the room. The judge softened his tone again. "Mr. Holt, please. Help me understand. What happened to you out there?" Slowly, Holt lifted his shaking hands to the collar of his worn coat. The room leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. "My team," he whispered. "They didn't all make it. And the ones who did, they weren't the same afterward. Neither was I." He pulled the coat open enough for the courtroom to glimpse the edges of his shirt, threadbare, stained, stretched thin from time. "I was injured," he said. "Badly. They didn't think I'd survive the night. So they left me, and the report said I died." The gallery erupted, soft exclamations, hands covering mouths, heads shaking. Caprio's expression was one of stunned sorrow. "But you did survive." "Yes," Holt answered. "Barely. Locals found me, took me in, kept me alive." His eyes hardened as they lifted toward the judge. "But surviving doesn't mean returning." Caprio's voice dropped. "Why didn't you come home?" Holt hesitated, long enough for a knot of tension to form in everyone's stomachs. "I tried," he said finally. "But when I got back, things were wrong. Records erased. My ID flagged. Someone had rewritten my file." The judge stiffened. "Rewritten how?" Holt took a breath so shaky it pulled every eye toward him. "They marked me as—" He stopped. "Marked you as what?" Caprio pressed. Holt's hands shook harder. He gripped the collar of his shirt and, with a decisive motion, pulled it down to reveal his upper chest. The courtroom gasped in unison. A brand, burned into his skin, dark, jagged, unmistakably deliberate. Caprio's face blanched. What is that?" Holt's voice broke as he answered. "It's the mark they gave the ones who knew too much." The room plunged into horrified silence. And before anyone could speak, Holt looked the judge dead in the eyes. "They didn't want me coming back, Your Honor. And if they find out I'm still alive, they'll finish what they started." For several heartbeats, the courtroom sat frozen, every set of eyes glued to the branded scar across Holt's chest. The weight of the moment soaked into the air, thick and suffocating. Even Judge Caprio seemed momentarily speechless, his hands rigid on the bench. Then, bang. The heavy courtroom doors burst open. Every head snapped toward the entrance. A tall man strode inside with the authority of someone used to owning the room. The crisp navy uniform, the polished badge, the unyielding posture, there was no mistaking him. Chief Douglas Riker, head of the city's police force, and father of the defendant. His footsteps echoed like hammer strikes across the floor as he marched toward the front. Judge Caprio lifted his chin. "Chief Riker, this court was not expecting your presence." "I'm aware," Riker answered, voice cold and clipped. "But I was informed my son was being dragged into a circus. Thought I'd see it for myself." A murmur rolled through the gallery. The defendant, Riker's son, straightened in his chair, confidence swelling now that backup had arrived. The chief's eyes swept the room, hard and searching, until they landed on Holt. Something in his expression shifted, barely, but enough. Holt's body stiffened. His shoulders pulled inward, and for the first time, true fear flickered across his weathered face. Caprio noticed immediately. "Chief Riker," the judge said slowly, "this proceeding concerns an assault charge. You're welcome to observe, but you will not interfere." Riker forced a smile, thin, polite, dangerous. "Of course, Your Honor. I respect the process." But his eyes never left Samuel Holt. The tension thickened, crawling across the room like frost. Riker turned finally toward the bench. "I heard there was an unexpected witness." Caprio's jaw hardened. "A veteran has stepped forward. His testimony may affect this case." The chief folded his arms. "A veteran?" His tone dripped skepticism. "And what exactly is he claiming?" Holt's voice cracked as he answered, "I'm claiming the truth." Riker's head snapped toward him. "I wasn't speaking to you." The gallery bristled with discomfort. Caprio's gavel struck once, sharp. "You will address anyone in this courtroom with respect," the judge ordered. Riker didn't look at the bench. Not immediately. He kept his eyes locked on Holt as if studying a ghost. Finally, he turned back to Caprio. "With all due respect, this man shouldn't be here. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Samuel Holt is dead." Gasps surged again. Caprio leaned forward. "He's very much alive." Riker's lips twitched. "Is he?" Holt's breathing grew ragged. His fingers dug into the fabric of his worn coat. His entire frame vibrated with anxiety. The judge noticed. And he didn't like what he saw. The chief moved closer, just a step, but enough to send a ripple of cold through the room. Holt recoiled instinctively, gripping the edge of the witness stand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Riker's posture was rigid, predatory. Holt's eyes darted between him and the judge, silently pleading for protection. Caprio raised a hand. "Chief Riker, take a seat. Your presence is causing intimidation." Riker's smile remained fixed, but something sharper entered his stare. "Intimidation?" He chuckled darkly. "If this man thinks I scare him, perhaps he has a guilty conscience." Holt whispered, "No. I remember you." The room stilled. Riker froze. "What did you say?" the chief asked, voice dangerously soft. Holt swallowed, then spoke louder, stronger. "I remember your voice." A tremor went through the gallery. Even the prosecutor straightened in shock. Riker's expression fractured for the first time, tightening into something darker and unmasked. Caprio's eyes narrowed. "Chief Riker," the judge said slowly, "why would this veteran recognize your voice?" Riker didn't speak. Holt did. "He was there," Holt whispered. The night they branded us. He was one of the officers. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Caprio's gavel slammed down again and again, but the uproar only built. Chief Riker's face drained of color, jaw clenched, fists curling at his sides. And then he whispered something under his breath. Something only Holt seemed to hear. Holt staggered backward, eyes widening in absolute terror. What did you just call me?" he whispered. Riker didn't answer. But the damage was done. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He didn't slam his gavel again. Instead, he simply sat back, folded his hands, and observed Chief Riker with the quiet intensity of a man who had just identified the weakness in a wall no one else could see. The courtroom was a minefield of swallowed breaths and darting eyes. Riker stood rigid, jaw clenched, but something in his posture had changed. The confidence he'd carried into the room minutes ago had thinned, replaced by a subtle tension around the shoulders, a stiffness that betrayed discomfort. Caprio noticed it immediately. "Chief Riker," he began softly, "please approach the bench." The chief didn't move at first. His eyes flickered, calculating. "Is that an order?" he asked. "It's an opportunity," Caprio replied, voice steady. "I suggest you take it." The chief stepped forward. Holt watched every step, trembling. The defendant, Riker's son, shifted uneasily, unsure whether his father's presence was still an advantage. The prosecutor leaned forward, sensing change. The gallery leaned with him. Caprio spoke in a tone so calm it felt like a lullaby wrapped in steel. "Chief, I want to clarify something simple," he began. "Do you know Mr. Holt personally?" Riker didn't blink. "No." Caprio nodded, pretending to accept the lie. "Then it should be easy to answer. Why did you call him a name under your breath?" Riker's nostrils flared. "I didn't." Caprio tilted his head slightly, the tiniest motion, but full of accusation. "You did," he said quietly. "2 bailiffs have already confirmed it." Riker stiffened. Holt clutched the witness stand, knuckles white. "This court," Caprio continued, "is not interested in petty insults. But it is interested in why a supposedly deceased veteran recognizes your voice, and why you reacted like a man caught." The chief swallowed. A small, almost invisible motion, but Caprio saw it. He pressed. "Tell me, Chief, have you ever participated in military operations? Covert assignments? Offshore missions?" "No," Riker answered quickly. "Have you ever been stationed overseas?" "No." "Have you ever worked alongside federal teams?" "No." Caprio paused, then smiled. A trap had been set, and Riker had stepped directly into the center. "Interesting." Holt lifted his head. Slowly, fear sharpening into realization. Caprio spoke softly, almost kindly. "Then how," he asked, "would Mr. Holt recognize your voice from a classified environment he claims civilians were not allowed to enter?" Silence. The kind of silence that bruises the air. Riker's eye twitched. His mouth opened, then shut again. Every muscle in his face tightened. Caprio leaned forward slightly. His tone grew gentler and more deadly. "Chief Riker, if you continue lying, I will be forced to subpoena your service records, sealed or unsealed. And if they are missing, altered, or classified beyond your pay grade." He let the sentence trail, letting imagination do the damage. The chief's breathing grew shallow. For the first time, he looked cornered. Holt watched him with trembling anticipation. The prosecutor watched with widening eyes. The defendant watched with growing panic. A bead of sweat formed at the side of Riker's temple. He wiped it too quickly, revealing nerves he couldn't hide. Caprio saw it all. "Chief," he said softly, "what exactly were you doing the night this man was branded?" Riker froze. Every muscle in Holt's body seemed to tighten at once, as if preparing for impact. The chief's voice came out low, too low. "I wasn't there." Caprio nodded. "Good. Then you can answer another simple question." Riker's jaw flexed. "Why," the judge asked slowly, "did you whisper the exact same codename Holt described in his report, a report that was classified?" The room erupted in shock. Holt stumbled backward, eyes wide with horror. Riker's face drained of color, completely. And then, in a voice barely audible but unmistakably furious, the chief whispered, "Because that name was never supposed to be spoken in public again." Caprio's eyes sharpened. Holt gasped. The courtroom froze. The silence after Chief Riker's accidental revelation was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that carried weight, dense, suffocating, heavy with consequences. Every person in the courtroom felt it pressing on their chest. Riker stood frozen, the last words he'd spoken seeming to echo back at him, mocking him. Never supposed to be spoken in public again. A confession disguised as a whisper. Judge Caprio didn't blink. He simply studied Riker as if dissecting a rare, dangerous creature. The prosecutor stood halfway out of his seat, eyes widening with predatory disbelief. Holt clutched the edge of the witness stand so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. And the defendant, Riker's son, looked like a man watching his fortress burn from the inside. Caprio inhaled slowly, deliberately. "Chief Riker," he said, voice barely above a murmur, "you realize what you just admitted?" Riker's eyes darted, left, right, unfocused, like a trapped animal searching for an exit. "I admitted nothing," he said sharply. Caprio leaned back. "Then allow the court to clarify. You recognized a code name from a classified military environment you claim you were never part of." Riker didn't answer. Sweat trickled down the side of his face. Holt took one trembling step forward. "He was there. I remember. His voice was one of the last things I heard before they—" His breath hitched. "Before they burned us." The gallery gasped. Riker snapped. "Enough." He slammed a fist against the railing so hard the sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. Two bailiffs instantly stepped forward, hands on holsters. Caprio raised a hand to calm them, but his voice dropped into a tone no one had ever heard from him, cold, unflinching. "Chief Riker," he warned, "your behavior is becoming unstable." "I am not unstable," Riker hissed. This man, this liar, he's manipulating you." His voice cracked on the last word. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, this is exactly the behavior of someone with something to hide. I request immediate detainment of the chief until we can verify his involvement in—" "Sit down," Riker barked. The prosecutor did not. He held his ground. And in that silent standoff, something inside Riker visibly fractured. Riker pushed a hand through his hair, hard, agitated, restless. His breathing sped. His uniform looked suddenly too tight, choking. Holt's gaze locked onto him with a painful mixture of terror and recognition. "You weren't supposed to survive," Riker muttered, too quietly. Caprio heard it. So did Holt. Holt staggered backward as if struck. "What did you say?" Riker realized his mistake too late. His eyes widened, a flare of panic he couldn't choke down. Caprio's tone sharpened. "Chief Riker, explain that statement." Riker shook his head. "No. I didn't mean, he's mishearing, he's confused." "Explain it," Caprio repeated, firmer. Riker's composure dissolved. His breathing turned harsh, erratic. His son whispered, "Dad, stop. Please stop." Riker ignored him. Caprio watched him with a calm that was more dangerous than rage. "I tried to help him," Riker blurted suddenly. "You don't understand what that operation was. None of you understand what we had to do." "What operation?" the prosecutor demanded. Riker's face twisted. "I said enough." But his voice cracked again, this time with something deeper than anger. Fear. Guilt. Memory. The gallery murmurs grew louder. The tension in the air thickened, pulling every heartbeat into a shared rhythm of dread. Caprio leaned forward, gentle but unrelenting. "Chief Riker," he said quietly, "I need you to listen to me. You are on the verge of incriminating yourself. If there is something you regret, something you know is wrong, you must say it now." Riker's breathing stopped. Completely. For 2 seconds, he stood frozen, eyes locked on Holt, eyes filled with something raw and haunted. Then he broke. He wasn't supposed to come back. Riker screamed. Chaos erupted. People stood. The prosecutor shouted. The bailiffs rushed forward. And in one wild, desperate movement. Riker reached for the inside of his jacket. Caprio shot to his feet. Holt gasped. The defendant yelled, "Dad, no!" But the chief's hand was already pulling something metallic into the open. Chaos erupted in a single heartbeat. Chief Riker's hand yanked something metallic from inside his uniform jacket. The courtroom gasped, bodies lurched back, papers scattered, chairs scraped violently across the floor. Two bailiffs lunged forward. The prosecutor dove behind the table. Caprio stood, voice booming. "Chief Riker, drop it." But the weapon wasn't a gun. It was a badge. A small, silver badge. Old, worn, and unfamiliar to everyone except two men. Holt froze. His breath hitched. His eyes locked on the emblem engraved at the center, an insignia he had last seen in firelight, on the chest of men who oversaw the branding. His heart pounded. Sweat poured from his temples. Every muscle in his body trembled. "Where did you get that?" Holt whispered, horror and memory crashing together. Riker didn't answer. His hand shook as he held the badge out, not as a threat, but as a confession. "It's all I kept," the chief said, voice breaking. "Everything else I destroyed." Caprio slowly lowered his hand from the bench, watching the two men with hawk-like focus. The room was silent except for Riker's ragged breathing and Holt's trembling gasp. The chief's knees bent, body sagging under a weight too heavy to hide anymore. "You weren't supposed to survive," Riker whispered. "But when I found out you did, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't." His voice dissolved. The defendant, his son, stood frozen, numb. "Dad, you were in that place?" he asked, voice barely audible. Riker didn't look at him. Holt stepped forward, unsteady but driven by something deeper than anger. I followed him. Every breath in the courtroom held still. He was face to face with a man linked to the worst night of his life. Riker looked up, expecting rage. Expecting revenge. Expecting Holt's fist, or a strike, or a scream. Instead, Holt held out his hand. Not to strike Riker, but to take the badge. Riker flinched. Then, slowly, he let it drop into Holt's shaking palm. The metal was cold, so cold it burned. Holt's breath stuttered. Memories flashed like broken film reels. The fire, the smell of seared flesh, the sound of men laughing, the weight of a boot pressing him down. He closed his eyes. For a moment the courtroom seemed to disappear, leaving only the past. And then he opened them again. "Chief Riker," Holt said quietly, "I could destroy you with a single sentence." Riker swallowed. His throat moved like he was trying not to cry. "I know. But I'm not going to." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor's jaw fell open. Caprio leaned forward, stunned. "Mr. Holt," he began. Holt raised a trembling hand. "Your Honor, I'm not forgiving him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I won't be responsible for someone else being branded a monster, no matter what he did to me." Riker stared at him as if the words were physically painful. Holt continued, voice quivering but firm. "I won't let hate finish what those men started." Those words cut through the room with more force than any weapon Riker could have drawn. The chief's shoulders collapsed. He wasn't standing anymore. He was folding into himself, breaking in ways the courtroom had never seen from a man like him. His son lowered his head, ashamed but aching. Caprio breathed out slowly, deeply moved. "Holt," he said gently, "mercy is a powerful choice. But justice still requires truth." Holt nodded. "I know. And I'm ready to tell you everything." The gallery tensed. Riker's eyes snapped up, fear flashing back into them. Caprio noticed. "So," the judge asked softly, "what happens next?" Holt opened his mouth. But before he could speak, a voice from the gallery shouted, "He's lying. The veteran isn't telling the whole story." The room spun toward the sound. A new figure stood at the back. Someone no one expected to see. The courtroom felt heavier than it ever had before, as if every breath taken inside it belonged to the same tense, trembling silence. The veteran sat with his hands folded, fingers trembling only slightly, but his eyes stood firm, unblinking, as though he already knew what fate awaited him and had long made peace with it. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, the lines of age and responsibility deepening on his face. His gavel lay untouched, but the weight of his duty pressed upon him like a stone on his chest. Everyone in the room sensed it. Something monumental was about to happen. Across the courtroom, the prosecutor stood with an expression sharpened by certainty. "Your Honor," he said, voice echoing with authority, "the defendant's actions, regardless of his military service, cannot be excused. The law is the law." The words sliced the silence, but no one breathed. The defense attorney stepped forward, shoulders squared yet eyes soft. "Your Honor, this man served this country with honor. He has endured trauma, homelessness, and unimaginable suffering. His so-called offense was an act of desperation, an act that harmed no one." She glanced back at the veteran, who lowered his gaze with quiet humility. Caprio's eyes scanned both sides, but his mind was deep in reflection. The veteran's story. The scars on his back. The moment he forgave the police chief. The room's collective gasp when he said, "I've seen worse men than me get second chances, Your Honor. I'm not asking for one. I'm asking for justice to mean something." Those words still echoed. Caprio inhaled slowly. "Before I give my verdict," he said, "I need clarity." He leaned forward. "Mr. Delaney," addressing the veteran, "do you regret what you did?" The veteran raised his head. The room tightened. "I regret," he whispered, "that I wasn't strong enough to ask for help sooner. I regret that my life ended up on this path. But I don't regret trying to survive, sir. I never meant harm. I just didn't want to die invisible." A woman in the audience quietly wiped her tears. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Caprio studied him for a long moment. Then he stood. The courtroom rose instinctively, trembling with anticipation. "My duty," Caprio began, voice steady yet burdened, "is not to simply punish. It is to understand. To weigh not only actions, but humanity. Today, this courtroom heard not just a case, but a life." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor." Caprio raised a hand. "No interruptions." The prosecutor froze. Caprio continued. "Mr. Delaney's actions broke the law. That cannot be ignored. But this city," he paused, scanning every pair of eyes watching him, "this city must also confront the truth that we failed him long before he ever stood here." A murmur rippled across the room. Caprio turned toward the veteran. "You deserved better, from the system, from society, from all of us. And while I cannot erase your scars, I can choose what future burden you must still carry." The courtroom held its breath. Caprio closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with resolve. "Therefore, my verdict is—" A loud crash interrupted him. The doors of the courtroom burst open. Two uniformed officers stormed inside, breathless, urgency burning in their eyes. One of them shouted, "Your Honor, stop the verdict. We have new evidence. You need to see this. Immediately." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. The defense attorney grabbed the table for balance. Caprio's hand hovered over his gavel, frozen. The veteran's face paled, whispering, "Oh no, not now." Caprio stared at the officers. "Bring the evidence forward," he said, voice trembling for the first time, because whatever they were holding in their hands was about to change everything. For a long, suffocating moment, no one moved. The officers stood in the doorway, chests rising and falling, holding a sealed evidence envelope marked urgent in thick red ink. The air in the courtroom shifted, as though someone had opened a window to a storm brewing just outside. Judge Caprio slowly lowered himself back into his seat. "Bring it here," he ordered, voice steady but laced with unease. The officers approached, boots echoing sharply on the floor. Even their footsteps felt accusatory. The veteran, Mr. Delaney, kept his gaze bowed, shoulders curled inward as if bracing for an unseen blow. When the envelope reached Caprio, the prosecutor leaned forward like a predator sensing prey. "Your Honor, if this evidence pertains to the defendant's prior activity—" Caprio cut him off. "We will not speculate." He slit the envelope open. Every eye strained to see what lay inside. Every breath was held. every heartbeat loud enough to feel. Caprio's expression darkened as he began reading the enclosed report, page after page, his eyes narrowing, mouth tightening, fingers gripping the paper just slightly too hard. A chill crept through the room, invisible but unmistakable. The defense attorney, Ms. Rowan, stepped toward the bench. "Your Honor, may we know what's been brought forward?" Caprio didn't answer immediately. He looked at the veteran. "Mr. Delaney," he said quietly, "is there anything you haven't told this court?" The veteran's throat bobbed. He lifted his head, revealing a face etched with fear he no longer had the strength to hide. I don't know what they found," he whispered. "But whatever it is, it doesn't change who I am." The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, this may very well change the entire trajectory of this case. If the evidence connects him to earlier incidents." Ms. Rowan slammed her hand on the table. "Enough. You don't know what it is." "I don't need to," the prosecutor snapped. "Men like him." Caprio's gavel cracked like lightning. "One more word of prejudice from either of you, and I will clear this courtroom." The room recoiled, silenced instantly. Caprio returned to the final page of the report. His brows knitted. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "This isn't what I expected." The prosecutor's eyes gleamed. "Is it incriminating?" But Caprio didn't respond. Instead, he gestured to the bailiff. "Have both counsel approach." Ms. Rowan and the prosecutor stepped forward, tension thick in their shoulders, jaws clenched. Caprio slid the report toward them. As they read, Ms. Rowan's eyes widened in horror. She staggered back a step, covering her mouth. The prosecutor froze completely, face draining of color, breath catching in his throat. What is this?" he muttered. The audience shifted uncomfortably, whispers filling the cracks of silence. Caprio's voice broke through. "This report claims that 5 months ago, on a freezing January night, an unidentified man intervened during a violent robbery near the river docks." He paused, letting the words settle. "The man subdued the attacker, called emergency services, and left before they arrived." The courtroom remained still, unsure where this was going. Caprio continued, holding up a photograph attached to the report. "The man caught on one of the surveillance cameras." He turned the image outward, though only those closest could see it. "Matches Mr. Delaney." Gasps burst through the room. The prosecutor blinked hard. This must be a mistake." Ms. Rowan shook her head in disbelief. "He saved someone's life. And never told anyone." The veteran trembled. Not from pride, but from a fear deeper than the courtroom understood. "I didn't want credit," he murmured. "I just couldn't let someone else suffer." Caprio studied him carefully, something shifting behind his eyes. The balance of the entire case tilted, redemption or ruin hanging like a blade above the veteran's head. But before Caprio could speak, one of the officers cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, voice grave, "there's something else we found, something we didn't put in the report yet." Caprio stiffened. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, glanced at the veteran, then back at the judge. "It's about the attacker from that night," he said quietly. "He wasn't a stranger." The room froze. Caprio narrowed his eyes. "Then who was he?" The officer stepped forward, and the truth he spoke next would unravel everything.